Everyone feared the millionaire CEO until the new secretary arrived and did what no one had ever done. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a cold Monday morning when Amelia Morgan arrived at the headquarters of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. The glass building gleamed under the winter sun, reflecting the sharp edges of the city's skyline. Amelia, however, felt nothing but a rising sense of dread. She had just landed her dream job as an executive assistant to CEO James Westbrook, a man feared by everyone around him. He was ruthless, sharp, and had built his empire with sheer determination and cold precision. His reputation was that of a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. No one dared to challenge him, and for good reason. Amelia had heard the stories. She had heard how James Westbrook crushed competitors, destroyed anyone who got in his way, and ruled his empire with an iron fist. People spoke of him with awe and fear. They said he had no heart, no empathy, that he was all business, all the time. As she stepped into the sleek, modern lobby, Amelia couldn't help but feel like a small fish in a very large pond. Her shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor as she approached the reception desk, her heart pounding in her chest. She was just a simple woman with a desire for a new start, and now she was about to enter the lion's den. As she entered the elevator, she tried to steady her breath. The doors slid closed, and the lift began its ascent to the top floor. Her mind raced with questions. What would it be like to work for someone like him? Would he even notice her? Or would she be just another face in the crowd? The elevator pinged softly, signaling her arrival at the executive floor. The doors opened, revealing a sleek, minimalist hallway lined with glass offices. She could see the silhouette of James Westbrook through his office window, seated behind a massive desk, his back straight as a ruler, his gaze fixed on the city below. Amelia took a deep breath and made her way down the hallway. She knocked lightly on his door before entering, her nerves a little more than she cared to admit. James looked up from his desk, his eyes cold and calculating. He didn't smile, didn't even stand up. "You must be Amelia," he said, his voice low and commanding. "Take a seat." Amelia obeyed, sitting down across from him. She could feel the tension in the room, as if the air itself was heavy with expectation. James studied her for a moment, his piercing blue eyes scanning her every move. "I don't have time for mistakes," he said bluntly. "You'll need to keep up, or you'll be gone. Do you understand?" His words were sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. Amelia nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand," she replied, trying to mask the nerves in her voice. James didn't speak again. He just stared at her, his gaze unwavering. For a moment, the silence felt unbearable. Amelia tried to steady her breathing, telling herself that she could handle this. She had to. This was her big break. And yet, in the face of this powerful man, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was in way over her head. The morning passed in a blur of emails, phone calls, and meetings. As the hours wore on, Amelia found herself growing more accustomed to the rhythm of the office. She was good at what she did, organized, efficient, and always one step ahead. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. Late in the afternoon, as she was wrapping up some paperwork, a crisis erupted. The company's most important investor was threatening to pull out, and James was furious. He stormed into the office, his jaw clenched in anger, his eyes filled with a cold fury that sent a chill down Amelia's spine. Without a word, he slammed a file down on her desk. "Fix it," he demanded. Amelia looked up at him, her mind racing. She had no idea how to handle this, how to fix the situation that was spiraling out of control. But then, something in her snapped. She could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure to perform. And, for the first time, she saw through the hard exterior of James Westbrook. He wasn't just a man of power. He was a man in pain, a man who had built his empire alone. And in that moment, Amelia realized something that no one else had seen before. She wasn't just here to be his assistant. She was here to help him see that there was more to life than the cold, calculated world he had created for himself. And with that realization, Amelia stood up, her voice steady as she spoke. I'll handle it, she said. James raised an eyebrow, surprised by her sudden confidence. You'll handle it? He repeated, his voice laced with skepticism. But Amelia didn't back down. Yes, I will, she said, her gaze unwavering. James studied her for a moment longer before nodding curtly. Very well, he said, his tone softened just a fraction. Show me what you've got. As the days passed, Amelia settled into the rhythm of her new role, her initial nervousness slowly fading into confidence. She handled the high-pressure demands of the office with grace, managing schedules, answering calls, and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. But the real test came when she had to face the crisis James had thrown her into. He had given her the task of saving the company's deal with the investor, and Amelia knew that this was her chance to prove herself. She could feel the weight of James' eyes on her, expecting results. She had to deliver. The stakes were high, and failure was not an option. Amelia immediately set to work. She gathered all the information she could, speaking with the finance team, reviewing contracts, and looking for a solution. She spent hours in meetings, working tirelessly to patch up the deal, all the while aware of James' presence looming over her every move. As the deadline approached, Amelia felt the pressure intensifying. James had barely said a word to her since assigning the task, but she could feel his gaze whenever he passed by her desk, his eyes sharp, evaluating her every move. She knew that if she failed, it would be the end of her short-lived career. Finally, after days of relentless work, Amelia found the solution. It wasn't perfect, but it was a compromise that would save the deal and keep the company's relationship with the investor intact. She gathered the necessary documents, put everything in order, and headed straight for James' office. As she knocked on the door, her heart raced. She couldn't afford to screw this up. Come in. James' voice was firm, just as it always was. Amelia walked in, holding the documents in her hands. She could feel her palms sweating, but she kept her composure. I've got the solution, she said, her voice steady. James didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, his piercing blue eyes scanning her face as if trying to measure her worth. Finally, he stood up from behind his desk and walked over to her. Let's see it then, he said, his voice cold, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that resembled curiosity. Amelia handed him the papers, watching his face as he scanned the documents. There was a long silence. Amelia could barely breathe, the tension between them palpable. Finally, James looked up at her. You did this? He asked, his voice softer than usual. Yes, she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. I found a way to make it work. It's not perfect, but it's the best we can do. James stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing her worth. For a brief second, Amelia thought he was going to dismiss her, but then he nodded. You did good, he said, his voice quieter now, with an almost approving tone. Amelia blinked, surprised. Thank you, she said, trying to hide the relief in her voice. For the first time since she started working for James, she felt like she had earned his respect. She had finally proven herself. But as she turned to leave, James' voice stopped her. Amelia, he said, his tone softer than she had ever heard. I'm impressed. You're not like the others. You actually care about the work. Amelia turned back to face him, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but something in the air between them had shifted. I'm not like the others because I don't just want the job, she said, her voice steady. I want to make a difference. I want to do something that matters. James studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. Then he nodded again, as if something inside him had clicked. All right, he said, his voice firm once more. Keep up the good work, Amelia. You're not what I expected, but you might just be exactly what this company needs. As she walked out of his office, Amelia felt a mix of emotions. She had made it. She had proven herself. But there was still so much more to do, and she wasn't about to stop now. She had earned his respect, but she knew that the hardest challenges were still ahead. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a transformation that would change not only her life, but also James Westbrook's. And as she stepped into the elevator, her mind raced with possibilities. The man who had once been feared by everyone was beginning to see her not just as an assistant, but as someone who could change everything. Amelia's confidence soared after James' approval, but she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. It had only been a few weeks since she stepped into the high-stakes world of Westbrook Technologies, and she was already feeling the weight of expectations. Still, She couldn't shake the feeling that she was only scratching the surface. James had acknowledged her abilities, but he was a man of few words, a man who kept his emotions tightly locked away. Despite his icy exterior, she had sensed a shift in him during their conversation. It was subtle, but it was there. There was something more to James than just the ruthless CEO everyone feared. As the days went by, their interactions grew more frequent, but they remained professional. Amelia found herself working late more often, diving into reports and meetings, trying to prove herself time and time again. Yet, something kept her coming back to his office, an unspoken understanding between them that she couldn't quite grasp. One day, she found herself standing outside his office door again, her nerves on edge. She had made a breakthrough on a new project, and this time, she was determined to get his attention in a way that would show him she was more than just an assistant. With a deep breath, she knocked softly and entered. James looked up from his desk, his sharp gaze scanning her face. "Amelia," he said, his voice as cool as ever. "What's the update? I've found a solution to the problem with our new project." Amelia began, feeling the weight of his stare. "I think we can improve the production timeline without sacrificing quality. It will take some initial investment, but the payoff will be substantial in the long run." She handed him the report, watching as he studied it intently. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning every detail. Amelia felt a small flutter of nervousness. This was her chance to show him that she had more to offer than just administrative work. Finally, he spoke. "You've put a lot of thought into this," he said, his voice almost softer than usual. "But what's the catch?" Amelia hesitated. She knew James would never go for a proposal without understanding the risks. She had anticipated that. "The risk is minimal, but we will need to work quickly to secure the funding," she explained. "The sooner we move, the better. Otherwise, we might lose this opportunity to a competitor." James looked at her, his gaze piercing. There was something different in his expression now. A flicker of respect, perhaps? It was hard to tell. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Amelia held her breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. "I'll give it a shot," he said, "but only because you've shown me you can handle this. Don't make me regret it." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She had done it. She had earned his trust. She left his office, her mind racing. The feeling of triumph was overwhelming, but there was still so much more to prove. As the days passed, Amelia began to notice something that made her pause. James, for all his sharpness and stoicism, seemed to be softening around her. He no longer regarded her with the same distant, calculating gaze. Instead, he seemed more present, more engaged. She couldn't pinpoint when the shift happened, but it was unmistakable. It wasn't just about work anymore. It was something more. It was the way he looked at her when she spoke, as if he was actually listening. The way he began to ask about her life outside of the office, small things like her hobbies and what she did on the weekends. She found herself answering more honestly, sharing little bits about her life that she had kept private. It was a strange feeling, letting him in, but at the same time it felt right. One evening, after another long day of work, James stopped by her desk as she was packing up to leave. "You've been putting in a lot of late hours," he remarked, his tone more casual than usual. "Take a break. You deserve it." Amelia looked up, surprised. She hadn't expected that from him. "I'm fine," she replied, offering a small smile. "I just want to get ahead of the next project." James raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're ambitious," he said. "I like that." As he turned to walk away, he paused, then looked back at her. "If you ever need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Amelia felt a strange flutter in her chest. Was this the beginning of something more? Amelia's world had shifted in a way she hadn't anticipated. It was no longer just about proving herself to James Westbrook or keeping up with the fast-paced demands of the company. Something deeper had begun to stir between them, a connection that went beyond the professional facade they both wore. She had felt it first, the subtle change in his behavior, the way he seemed to pay more attention to her words, the quiet moments they shared during late nights in the office. It was almost as if he was allowing her into a part of his life that no one else had access to. And it scared her. She had always been the one to keep her emotions at bay, never allowing anyone to get too close. But with James, it was different. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, and as much as she tried to deny it, She couldn't shake the feeling that he was starting to matter to her in a way she hadn't planned. It had been 2 weeks since their last conversation, and Amelia had been working tirelessly on the latest project. The tension between them, though subtle, was palpable. She had to admit, she was beginning to look forward to their interactions. One evening, as she was preparing to leave, she found herself once again standing at the door of James' office. She had become accustomed to the long hours, but today felt different. Something in the air had shifted. Her heart pounded in her chest as she knocked softly. "Come in," came his familiar voice. As she stepped inside, she noticed the tired look in his eyes. It was late, but he was still at his desk, scanning through reports. "You need to stop working so late," Amelia said, her voice soft. James looked up, surprised by her concern. "I'm fine," he said, though there was a hint of exhaustion in his tone. He didn't try to hide it. Amelia stepped forward, her gaze softening as she watched him. "You don't have to carry the weight of this company alone," she said quietly. James looked at her for a long moment, as if searching for something in her words. "I know," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "But it's hard to trust anyone, you know? People don't always have the best intentions." There it was, that vulnerability she had glimpsed before. Amelia's heart softened. She had always seen him as the unshakable CEO, the man who could handle anything thrown his way. But now, she saw a side of him that few had. "You don't have to do everything by yourself," she said again, her words filled with sincerity. For a moment, James didn't speak. He just watched her, as if weighing her words. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned back in his chair and let out a sigh. "Maybe you're right," he said, his voice still tinged with weariness. Amelia felt a surge of relief. She hadn't expected to get through to him, but something in that moment made her believe they were getting closer. She had started this job with the intention of proving her worth. Now, she realized it was about much more than that. It was about building something real. As she turned to leave, James spoke again. "Amelia," he said, his tone more earnest than she had ever heard. She paused, looking back at him. "Thank you," he added quietly. Amelia nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Anytime," she said, her voice soft but firm. As she walked out of his office, she couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. She had started to see a side of James that few people had, and while she wasn't sure what the future held, she knew that this was just the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter, not only for the company, but for the connection that was quietly growing between them. Amelia didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. As the days went by, the tension between Amelia and James continued to evolve in subtle but undeniable ways. Amelia had proven herself time and time again, and James was starting to rely on her in ways he hadn't done with anyone else. He began to trust her instincts, giving her more responsibility, and even began to open up to her about personal matters. Amelia, on the other hand, found herself becoming more and more attached to the man who had once seemed like an unapproachable force. It wasn't just about the work anymore. She couldn't deny that there was a growing connection between them, something that went beyond the professional. But she was cautious. She had been burned before, and the last thing she wanted was to risk everything for a man who might not feel the same way. One evening, after a long day at the office, James asked Amelia to join him for a drink at the company's private lounge. It was rare for him to invite anyone to join him after hours, and Amelia wondered if this was more than just a casual invitation. As she entered the lounge, she found him sitting at a table by the window, looking out at the city skyline. He was dressed casually, his usual sharp demeanor softened by the relaxed atmosphere. "I thought you could use a break," he said, his voice low and inviting. Amelia smiled, taking a seat across from him. "I think you're right," she replied, trying to keep the nerves at bay. They talked about work at first, discussing the latest project and some of the challenges they were facing. But as the conversation flowed, it drifted into more personal territory. James began to ask her about her life outside of work, about her dreams and her past. For the first time, Amelia felt like she could be honest with him. She told him about her childhood, the struggles she had faced growing up, and how she had worked so hard to get where she was. James listened intently, his gaze never leaving hers. There was no judgment in his eyes, just understanding. For a moment, Amelia felt like she was talking to someone who truly cared. "You've come a long way," James said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. "You don't give up, do you?" Amelia shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. No, I don't, she said softly. There was a long silence between them, one that felt comfortable, almost intimate. Amelia felt a shift in the air, a tension that wasn't just professional anymore. She looked up at James, meeting his gaze. For a moment, she saw something in his eyes, something vulnerable. He wasn't just the CEO. He wasn't just the man who ran this empire. He was someone who had experienced pain, who had his own demons. And she realized that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see her as more than just an assistant. Amelia, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I never thought I'd find someone like you here. Someone who gets things done, but also, he paused, searching for the right words. Someone who cares. You care about this company, but I think you also care about people. And I don't think I've had someone like that in my life for a long time. Amelia felt her heart race, but she tried to keep her emotions in check. I do care, she said, her voice steady. I care about the work, but I also care about the people who make it happen. Without them, there is no company. James smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. You've made me realize that, he said. Maybe I've been too focused on the bottom line, too focused on the success of the company. But you've reminded me that it's not just about that. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure where this was going, but something in her told her it was leading to something important. The moment between them lingered in the air, filled with unspoken words. James leaned in slightly, his gaze intense. Amelia, he said, his voice hushed. I think I need someone like you around here more than I realized. Amelia swallowed hard, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what he meant by that, but she couldn't deny that the feelings between them had started to shift. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but for the first time, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something much bigger than either of them. She had always believed that work was about results, about proving yourself. But now, she was beginning to see that it was also about connection. And maybe, just maybe, this connection was the key to both of their futures. As Amelia walked out of the private lounge, her mind was racing. The conversation with James had stirred something inside her that she had tried so hard to suppress. Feelings she hadn't expected. She had always kept her emotions in check, focused solely on her career, but with James, things were different. She couldn't deny the chemistry between them, the way their words lingered in the air long after they were spoken. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to confront it. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and project deadlines, but Amelia found it hard to shake the conversation from her mind. James had trusted her with more than just work. He had trusted her with a piece of himself. And that vulnerability, that glimpse of the man behind the CEO facade, was both surprising and unsettling. She knew she couldn't keep pretending that everything was just professional. As the week went on, things between her and James became more complicated. There was a palpable tension whenever they spoke, but it wasn't the same cold distance that had existed before. It was something more, something that neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge. One late afternoon, James called her into his office. She had just finished a meeting with the finance team, and she was tired, but something about his voice when he spoke her name made her pause. Amelia, can you come in for a minute? His tone was different than usual, more urgent, more personal. She walked into his office, her heart racing as she wondered what was going on. James was standing by the window, staring out at the city below. For a moment, he didn't turn around, and the silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words. I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about the other night, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She had hoped the conversation would just fade into the background, but now, it seemed like it was coming back with full force. James, she started, unsure of what to say. We don't have to. But he cut her off before she could finish. No, Amelia, I've been thinking, he repeated, turning to face her. I don't want to pretend like nothing's changed. I know we've had our professional boundaries, but I can't ignore what's happening between us. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. His words were a declaration, a recognition of something she had feared acknowledging. James, I don't want to risk. She stopped herself, suddenly unsure of where this conversation was going. I'm not asking you to risk anything, James interrupted, stepping closer. I just want you to understand that I see you, not just as an assistant, but as someone who matters. You've changed the way I look at things, Amelia. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never expected him to say something like this, especially not with the cold, calculated image he had always projected. This was a side of him she had never seen before. "James," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what this means. We're both here to work. That's all." He nodded, his expression softening. "I get it. But I think we've crossed a line, whether we admit it or not. And I think we should both decide what happens next." The weight of his words settled in the room. For a moment, Amelia didn't know what to say. She wasn't ready to let herself fall into something uncertain, especially with someone like James, whose world was filled with power and ambition. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. James didn't push her. Instead, he gave her a small, understanding smile. "We don't have to make any decisions tonight. But I wanted you to know where I stand." The tension in the room shifted, and for the first time in a long while, Amelia felt like she wasn't just another cog in the machine. She was someone who mattered. As she walked out of his office that evening, her thoughts were swirling. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but she knew one thing. The relationship between her and James had shifted, and there was no turning back now. Amelia walked into her office the next morning with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The conversation with James from the night before echoed in her mind. She wasn't sure where it was going, or if it was even going anywhere at all. He had opened up to her, shown vulnerability that no one else had seen, but she couldn't let herself get caught up in the emotion of it. She needed to focus. There was still work to do, and that was her priority. She tried to shake off the unease that had settled in her chest, but as the morning wore on, she couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. The office buzzed with activity, and Amelia fell into her routine, answering calls, organizing meetings, and keeping everything running smoothly. But her mind kept drifting back to James. As the day progressed, Amelia's phone buzzed with a message from him. "Meeting in my office at 3. It's important." Her heart skipped a beat. The previous night's conversation had left so many questions hanging in the air. What did he want to discuss now? She had no idea, but the sense of urgency in his message left her uneasy. She spent the next few hours trying to focus, but it was hard to ignore the gnawing feeling in her stomach. When 3 o'clock arrived, Amelia walked toward James' office, her mind racing with possibilities. She knocked and entered, finding him standing by the window, as he often did when he needed to think. The city skyline stretched out before them, the bustle of the city a stark contrast to the quiet in the room. James turned when he heard the door open, his expression unreadable. "Amelia," he said, his voice steady. "Come in, we need to talk." She nodded and stepped inside, closing the door behind her. James motioned to the chair across from him, and she took a seat. "What's going on, James?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He didn't immediately respond. Instead, he walked over to his desk, picking up a file and flipping through it. Amelia waited, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, he looked up at her, his eyes locking with hers. "I've been thinking about the direction of the company," he said, his tone serious. "And I think it's time for some changes. But I need someone I can trust to help me implement them." Amelia held her breath, unsure of where this was going. "What kind of changes?" she asked cautiously. "Big ones," James replied, his voice low. "I've been so focused on numbers and profits that I've neglected the people who actually make this company run. I want to shift our focus, build a stronger, more supportive company culture. But I need someone to help me do it." He paused, and for a moment, Amelia thought he might say something more. "And you want me to help?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. James nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "Yes. You've already shown me that you care about the company and the people here. You've proved you can handle responsibility. I need you to help me lead this change." Amelia felt a surge of emotion, a mix of pride and uncertainty. This was an opportunity she had never imagined, and yet, here it was, in front of her. She wasn't sure she was ready for such a big role, but she couldn't deny that this was what she had been working toward. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling in her chest. James gave her a small smile, a rare one that softened his usually stern expression. "I knew I could count on you," he said, his voice warm. The weight of the responsibility hit her all at once, but Amelia didn't back down. This was her moment. As she left his office that day, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. She was no longer just a part of the machine. She was a key player in shaping the future of the company. And as much as she had tried to keep her emotions in check, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of admiration, and something deeper, for the man who had trusted her with this opportunity. The lines between their professional relationship and something more personal were starting to blur, but for now, she pushed those thoughts aside. There was work to be done, and she was ready for it. Amelia had barely begun to process the enormity of James' proposal when everything began to fall into place. The weight of the responsibility he had entrusted her with wasn't lost on her, but what caught her by surprise was how seamlessly she fit into the new role. The transition from being just his assistant to being his right hand in the company's new direction was gradual, yet powerful. The first few weeks of change felt like a whirlwind, late nights in the office, strategic meetings, rebranding ideas, and countless phone calls with various departments. James, as always, remained focused on the bigger picture, but Amelia could sense the growing trust between them. It wasn't just about work anymore. It felt like they were partners, each playing their part to drive the company forward. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, James asked Amelia to stay behind for a private meeting. She had anticipated the request, knowing the momentum of the changes they had been implementing required constant attention. As she entered his office, she was surprised to see him sitting at his desk, looking more serious than usual. "Amelia," he said, his tone steady, "I need your thoughts on something. We're at a critical juncture, and I want you to help me decide on our next step." Her heart raced. Every decision felt like a test, and yet, for the first time, she felt like she had a voice in this company. "Of course," she replied, walking over to his desk. "What's on your mind?" James leaned back in his chair, staring at the documents in front of him. "We've made some great strides, but there's one part of the plan I'm uncertain about," he said. "The new initiative we've been working on. There are risks involved, and I'm not sure we should push it forward so soon." Amelia took a deep breath. She had been anticipating this moment, knowing that they had been walking a fine line between ambition and caution. "What are the risks?" she asked, her voice calm but curious. James looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "Financial stability is one. The potential backlash from stakeholders is another. But more than that," he paused, leaning forward slightly. "I don't want to rush this if it's not the right time. I don't want to lose everything we've built." Amelia thought for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. She knew how much was at stake, not just for the company, but for James personally. "I understand," she said softly. "But maybe it's not about rushing. It's about taking the calculated risks that are necessary for growth. You've built this empire by making bold decisions, by stepping outside of your comfort zone. Sometimes, the right time is now, even if it feels too soon." James looked at her, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be weighing her words carefully. For a long moment, the room was quiet, filled only with the sound of the city outside. Finally, he nodded. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "It's time to move forward. But we'll do it carefully, and I'll need you by my side every step of the way." Amelia felt a rush of pride. She had been right. He was listening to her. She had earned his trust, and now, more than ever, she felt a sense of belonging, not just in the company, but in the future they were building together. As she left his office that night, the world outside seemed a little brighter. The city lights reflected off the glass buildings, and for the first time, Amelia felt like she was standing at the edge of something huge. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was part of something much bigger. The road ahead was uncertain, but with James by her side, she felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The trust they had built was unspoken but strong, and as they moved forward into the next phase of their journey, Amelia knew that the future was theirs to shape. The next few months flew by in a blur of hard work, long hours, and triumphs. Amelia and James, once just colleagues, had grown into a well-oiled team. The company thrived under their leadership, and the changes they had implemented were beginning to show results. It wasn't just about the projects anymore. It was about the culture they were building, the environment of trust, respect, and collaboration that they had nurtured together. Despite the overwhelming success, there was something even more profound that had shifted between them. The tension that had once existed in their professional relationship had slowly transformed into something deeper, something unspoken yet undeniable. They had crossed a line, one that neither of them could ignore anymore. It wasn't just about business now. Amelia had begun to realize that what she had with James wasn't just admiration or respect. It was something more. And, as much as she tried to push it aside, it was becoming harder to deny the feelings that had been growing inside her. James, too, had changed. The man who had once been a solitary figure, consumed by work and success, was now more open, more present. He had let her in, not just as a colleague, but as someone he could truly rely on. He had shown her sides of himself that no one had ever seen. But there was still one thing left unspoken between them. One final hurdle to overcome. On the night of the company's biggest event of the year, a charity gala meant to celebrate their successes, Amelia found herself standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. The evening had been perfect. Everything was running smoothly, just as they had planned. But in the midst of the excitement, Amelia felt a wave of uncertainty. She had been waiting for this moment. The moment when things between her and James would finally come to a head. She had spent so long convincing herself that their connection was just professional, that it was enough. But deep down, she knew she wanted more. She didn't know if James felt the same way, or if their bond had simply been forged in the fire of their shared success. As the night wore on, James approached her, his presence unmistakable. He stood next to her, looking out at the city, his gaze distant. "Amelia," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that she hadn't heard before. "I've been thinking." She turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. James took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "About everything. About the company, about the future, and about you." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Amelia's pulse quickened, but she stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "I don't want to leave anything unsaid," he said, his voice softer now. "I don't want to pretend like we haven't built something special, not just with the company, but with each other." Amelia's heart raced as she realized what he was saying. She had been waiting for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, she didn't know how to respond. "James, she began, but he cut her off gently. "Amelia, I've never met anyone like you," he said, his voice firm yet filled with emotion. "You've challenged me, pushed me, and made me realize what really matters. And I can't imagine my future without you in it, both professionally and personally." The words were simple, yet they carried a depth of sincerity that took her breath away. Amelia's mind raced, her emotions overwhelming her. She had never expected this, had never dared to dream that someone like James could feel this way about her. And yet, here he was, standing before her, offering her something more than just a partnership in business. It was a partnership in life. "I want this," she whispered, her voice shaky but determined. "I want to build something real with you, James." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Then let's build it together," he said softly. The moment between them was perfect, and for the first time, Amelia felt a sense of peace. She had found her place, not just in the company, but in James' world. And as they stood there, looking out at the future they would build together, Amelia knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way, both in business and in life. And for the first time, Amelia felt truly at home.